you'll see there'll be a message popping up telling you that we're live streamed on YouTube so that members of the public can watch. Okay, pursuant to Joint Rule 29A, you'll see there'll be a message. Oh, okay, and now I have to turn that off or else I can hear myself talking. There we go. Okay. Welcome, everyone. I am Representative Ken Gordon, and on behalf of Senator Mike Brady, who I'm going to give a chance to speak in just 1 minute, we welcome you to the 12th meeting of the Special Legislative Commission to study and examine the civil service law, personnel administration rules, hiring procedures, and bylaws for municipalities not subject to civil service law and state police hiring practices. And as we do, just for the benefit of the public who may be watching, I'm going to take a roll call. And so I'm going to start with Marcella King. I'll also look in the waiting room. Michael Papani, firefighters.
Mr. Chairman, Billy Cabral sitting in for Mike Papani today.
Okay. Tom Reddy, police union.
Good morning. I'm present.
Good morning. Sophia Hall, ACLU.
Good morning, present.
Good morning. Neil Osborne, and local NAACP.
Good morning, everyone. Neil's here.
Thank you. Larry Calderon.
Morning, Mr. Chairman. Morning, everybody.
Good morning. Christopher Del Monte, Chief Del Monte.
Good morning, everyone present.
Good morning. James Wona, Fire Chiefs. Chief.
Present. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning. Jeffrey Lopes, Minority Law Enforcement Officers. Jeffrey Lopes. Okay. Stephen Gabriel, State Police. Okay. Robert Quinnen, Civil Service.
Good morning, present.
Good morning. Eric Astapenis, Secretary of Public Safety.
Good morning, everyone present.
Morning. Ron Renault, ANF.
Good morning, present.
Morning. Richard Sweeney, Mass Bar Association. Attorney Sweeney. Okay. If anybody, we'll take a look at the wait as people come in through the waiting room. We'll add you to the attendance. Tom Lyons, Veteran Services Agents Association.
Good morning, present.
Morning. Secretary Cheryl Poppy, Veteran Services.
Good morning, Mr. Chair. Good morning, everyone.
Good
Present.
morning. Good morning. Jesse Flynn, I see you
Present, thank you.
there. Jen Breaker, MMA.
Good morning, present.
Kimberly Parr, AG's office. Kimberly Parr, sometimes the AG has a representative. Is anyone here from the AG's office? Yeah. Okay, Rep. China Tyler, I saw you on here.
Morning, Mr. Chairman.
Good morning. Rep. Maria Robinson, I saw you on here.
Good morning, Mr. Chair.
It's good to see you. And as many of us know, you'll be headed off for the federal government. So good luck there. Rep. Natalie Higgins, I saw you.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman.
Rep. Pat Haddad.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm here.
Good morning. Rep. Tim Whalen. Senator Moore, we've spoken.
I'm here, Mr. Chairman.
Yep. Senator Kennedy. I think I see you.
Morning, Mr. Chairman.
Morning. And Senator Bruce Tarr or Hirak. Or anyone else representing Senator Tarr? Okay, sometimes Hirak comes a little bit later and his attendance, if he's here, will be noted as well. Okay. First thing is approval of the minutes. You've received a copy of the minutes. Got a chance to review them. Can I, does anyone wish to make any amendments first?
Move approval of the minutes, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Is there anyone who wants to second? Second. All those in favor of approving the minutes, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Okay, minutes are approved. I'm going to talk a little bit about the status of our commission, our schedule, and then we're going to go right into reports of the two subcommittees that have that are going to report today, which are the municipalities in civil service, essentially, and the diversity subcommittee. Our report to the legislature.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
I'm sorry. Just before we start, we
Yes,
just
please.
lost a state trooper in a horrific accident. If for all respect of all the police personnel and all of us on the line today, can we have a moment of silence because we just did lose a state trooper?
Okay, thank you for that. Thank you, Senator. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And Chair Brady, do you have any remarks to share?
I do not. I just want to welcome everybody on today.
Okay, so, all right, so I'm going to start with that. Our report is due on March 31st, 2022, which is 3 weeks from yesterday. Working back from that, the chairs, assisted by committee staff, which is the Committee on Public Service, will begin drafting a report after this hearing. The report will review the history of Chapter 31, our civil service laws, and base its findings on the testimony we collected by this commission and the various subcommittees. We're going to include recommendations to the legislature that you heard last week and you'll be hearing today, as well as some that may come to the front through the chairs, and circulate them to the commission members for a vote on each recommendation. If we have time before March 31st, 2022, we may look to have a meeting or a hearing scheduled, but we don't have dedicated staff to this commission, so I can't guarantee when we'll have the report available to everyone. I expect and hope it will be made available by Friday the 25th or the following Monday. That will give you a chance to read the findings and the recommendations, and then we'll take a vote. Now, the votes will be published as part of our report, and each commissioner's vote will be recorded and published. The recommendations that receive a vote of the majority of the commissioners will be included in that recommendation to the legislature. One thought, because this goes to our schedule, that the chairs have with respect to the recommendations is that it may be a good idea to recommend that this commission continue in some form beyond the filing of the report, so that we can oversee some of the recommendations that we've made, if to the extent that they're accepted by the legislature. So there's a place to go, because I think the chairs would like to see that the work that we do would continue beyond this. Now, it may very well be that because many of us are appointed in a representative capacity, including the chairs, because we're chairs of the Joint Committee on Public Service, it may be there are other individuals in January 2023 that replace some, but it may be that the report that we give is not the last word on this subject. It's just something I think we might want to include, and you may see. With that, let's go to our first report of our first subcommittee. This is the Committee on Municipalities within Civil Service. Senator Michael Moore, take the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and Chairman Brady and everyone part of the commission for being here this morning. Mark from my office, are you on?
I am, Senator. I'm going to share my screen in a second. I think I just need permission to do so first.
Okay, that's what I was just going to. All right, so Mr. Chairman, can we have a PowerPoint you would like to present with this?
Yeah, so Jesse, you give someone co-host authority to do that, right?
You should be able to share screen, but let me know.
Okay.
It's saying the host disabled screen sharing.
Can you do that, Jesse, or do you need me to?
How is that?
We can
That
see
looks
it.
good.
I can see it.
We're good to go. Thank you.
All right, we're all set, Mark?
Yep.
All right, great. Okay, thank you. So again, thank you all. Senator Michael Moore, and this was as the chairman stated, the committee for communities for municipalities still within civil service. During this process, we had 9 committee hearings or committee meetings. The subcommittee charge was to study the employment, promotion, performance, evaluation, and disciplinary procedures for civil service employees, including the hiring and recruitment process for civil service positions, the use of civil service eligibility lists, the statutory merit preference status, and the hiring from those eligible lists, all current civil service examinations and the use of the examinations for hiring and promotions, collective bargaining agreements by unions, the disciplinary and appeal procedures as applied to civil service employees, and identifying any barriers that exist in hiring, recruiting, or promoting civil service employees. We did invite outside speakers to present before our subcommittee. We had the Massachusetts Association of Minority Law Enforcement Officers. We had Boston Firefighters Local 718, Boston Fire Department, the town of Burlington, a representative from the town of Burlington, a representative from the Marlborough Fire Department, representative from the town of Norwood, and someone from the Massachusetts Association of Professional Law Enforcement. So these are some of the recommendations we had. I do want to note that the following recommendations were approved by the subcommittee by at least a majority vote. So the first recommendation we have is to reduce entrance exam fees. There is a broad consensus that the civil service system entrance exam fees are too high and should be reduced. The subcommittee heard from many speakers that the exam fees reduce the diversity of applicants. In addition, the exam fee alone does not reflect the true cost of applying for a civil service position. Applicants often take multiple exams, incurring the exam fee each time. Moreover, applicants have the separate cost of acquiring test preparation materials. For those that choose to apply, the application process for a civil service position can quickly become a very expensive endeavor with no guarantee for success. For others, learning of this cost can discourage potential applicants from applying in the first instance. The subcommittee also heard the exam fees that the exam fee waivers are insufficient to address this issue due to burdensome documentation requirements to apply for an exam fee waiver. Under the current budgetary scheme, the civil service system is generally funded by the cost of the exams. The subcommittee recommends that the Commonwealth instead fully fund the cost of operating the civil service system. In addition, there should be a $100 cap on exam fees. So that's the first recommendation we had. The second recommendation deals with the expansion for recruitment. The subcommittee heard that a key element to hiring a diverse and well-qualified workforce is the recruitment efforts. The subcommittee identified several areas to enhance recruitment efforts. The subcommittee recommends establishing a dedicated recruitment and marketing budget for recruitment staff. In addition, this budget would support the creation and distribution of educational and promotional materials. The second recommendation of this subgroup is recruitment efforts should take place year-round, not just before exams. Third, new locations should be added to existing recruitment locations, including schools, particularly community colleges, religious institutions, and community centers. Fourth, the subcommittee recommends the creation of new mentorship programs and public safety professional recognition days. Finally, the Commonwealth should sponsor radio, television, and internet ads to promote public safety service. In addition to direct recruitment by the Commonwealth should create recruitment resources and tools for use by municipalities who wish to enhance their own recruitment. The creation of shared tools and resources would eliminate the need for municipalities to recreate the Commonwealth's efforts. These tools should include a website with information and resources for the cities and towns. A shared services model would be particularly beneficial for smaller communities that do not have their own dedicated recruitment staff. In addition to recruitment by public entities, recruitment should also occur in partnership with non-governmental organizations. For example, veteran service groups and other community organizations can be a resource to spread awareness about civil service positions and upcoming exams. The next recommendation deals with allowing flexibility in exam frequency. The subcommittee learned of a recent change to the Human Resources Division, HID, to switch exam frequency to an annual exam. In addition to existing statutory constraints, HID lacks the authority to give hiring entities the option to opt into an annual exam. The subcommittee recommends that civil service that the civil service law be amended to provide hiring entities with the ability to opt into an annual exam. In addition, the subcommittee recommends that there be a requirement that a hiring entity administer an exam at least once every 2 years. This option should be flexible, allowing hiring entities to select the exam frequency best suited for them at the time. And it should be a simple and straightforward process for municipalities to select the exam frequency best suited for their community needs. The next recommendation deals with expansion of the exam eligibility and minimum age requirements. The subcommittee recommends amending the civil service law to allow an applicant to take a civil service entrance exam prior to the applicant turning the minimum age necessary to hold a particular civil service position. Specifically, the subcommittee proposes a leading window of exam eligibility of 6 to 12 months before the applicant turns the minimum age necessary to hold the particular civil service position. The subcommittee considered tying the leading eligibility window to the date of appointment, but determined that changes in the length of the hiring process could cause confusion on when the actual date of appointment will take place. This proposal will afford applicants greater certainty in their civil service job prospects by allowing them to begin the application process earlier on rather than requiring that prospective applicant to wait to begin the process. As a result, this proposal will allow hiring entities under civil service system to better compete with non-civil service employers for qualified applicants. The next recommendation is to add a new hiring preference for higher education. The subcommittee heard from speakers advocating for the creation of a higher education requirement related to civil service positions. In evaluating this recommendation, the subcommittee considered the potential impacts that a higher education requirement could have on the size of the applicant pool, the impact on those unable to afford the cost of higher education, and the impact on military applicants. The subcommittee voted on and rejected a recommendation for a higher education requirement. Instead, the subcommittee voted to adopt a recommendation for the creation of a new higher education preference in the civil service hiring process. This preference would not supersede existing preferences. Instead, it would operate in conjunction with existing preferences. Finally, the subcommittee considered but voted to reject making the higher education preference a local option. That is, subject to adoption by a vote on the local level by a city or town. We also looked at and recommend to remove outdated language from the civil service law. The subcommittee recommends that the civil service law be reviewed to remove outdated language. For example, the statute still uses the term mentally retarded person in section 47 of chapter 31. Gender language should also be removed from the statute. For example, referring to the chair of the Civil Service Commission as the chairman. The next one was the recommendation to evaluate requiring a diversity plan in chapter 31A changes. The subcommittee learned that communities that have left the civil service system have not been able to demonstrate gains in workforce diversity. To help ensure that communities that are leaving the civil service system see gains in workforce diversity, the subcommittee recommends that the full special commission evaluate the possibility of requiring that a community submit a diversity plan as part of exiting the civil service system. The diversity plan could detail the initiatives and efforts a departing community will undertake in order to achieve and maintain a diversified workforce. In addition, the full special commission should evaluate a requirement that communities that leave civil service system be required to produce a hiring report on the demographics of their workforce. Ultimately, these reports will help demonstrate the success of a community's diversity efforts. In addition to the subcommittee, hold on. In addition to the subcommittee recommendations, that the full special commission evaluate possible changes to chapter 31A of the general laws. Chapter 31A is a local option alternative to the civil service law. It is the subcommittee's understanding that no community has adopted into chapter 31A, and therefore chapter 31A may currently function as a dead letter option. Modifying chapter 31A to remove burdensome requirements which have made it an unattractive option in the past, and instead establishing it as a list of minimum requirements for communities leaving the civil service system, which could act as a suitable area to implement a diversity plan requirement and other minimum requirements for communities that leave the civil service system. For example, requirements for transparency, non-discrimination, and an appeal process. We also recommend to simplify and increase flexibility for special certification lists. Under the personal administration rules, a municipality may request a special certification list for persons having specialized and job-related qualifications. These special qualifications are in addition to general qualifications covered by the exams. In order to receive a special certification list, the appointing authority must complete a questionnaire and provide HID with certain statistical information related to its request. For example, a special certification list for language would require an appointing authority provide HID with the nature and frequency of the contacts between public safety employees in the position title and the non-English speaking members of the population. This includes the number of calls that need an interpreter for the language being requested and the number of incidents in the community where an interpreter is needed. Generally, in order to obtain a special certification list for a foreign language skill, the appointing authority must be able to clearly document that those who hold a particular title must have the additional qualification of fluency in a language other than English in order to adequately serve the public. It is the subcommittee's understanding that some public safety departments have not collected that data or have insufficient data necessary to obtain a special hiring certification list. While the subcommittee discussed allowing an appointing authority to rely on the demographic information from their community to justify a special certification request, the subcommittee recommends the full special commission further consider this matter, specifically that the full special commission should consider simplifying the process for obtaining a special certification list and adding flexibility to the process. In addition, the civil service unit should hold a public hearing on the special certification approval policy. The subcommittee also recommends that any changes are applied to other types of special certification lists, for example, gender. The next recommendation deals with evaluating, providing credit or partial credit for Reserve and National Guard service. The subcommittee learned that if an individual serves in the National Guard, but only serves for 180 days or less per year, they do not receive credit as a veteran, even if the individual performs such service year after year. The subcommittee notes that following the events of 9/11, the role of the National Guard has substantially expanded, both through deployments in Iraq and Afghanistan, but also at home through the establishment of field hospitals and their presence in schools and soldiers' home. The subcommittee recommends that the Special Legislative Commission further consider this matter. One potential solution could be Senate 1670, filed by Senator Nick Collins, that would address this issue by creating a new National Guard preference below veterans, but above civilians. Demographic information from the National Guard may be needed to fully evaluate this matter. I am now going to turn over to Rob Quinlan from the Civil Service Department, so he can go over some additional recommendations that the committee made. Rob?
Thank you, Senator Moore. Those are very interesting recommendations so far. And I think I'd like to ask Chair Gordon whether it would make sense to invite other commissioners who are not members of Senator Moore's subcommittee to comment on the first 9 recommendations that have been proposed so far, or should we go through the entire set of 13?
Yeah, I think our schedule is that we hear from your subcommittee and then we take questions or comments from the commission. It's just, I think it would flow a little bit better. So why don't you go ahead and then we'll proceed.
So my topic is one of 3 recommendations, the first being to enhance the authority of the Civil Service Commission. I'd like to begin by briefly discussing bypass appeals, which are a major category of appeals heard by the commission. They arise when a local hiring authority does not select the highest ranked individual when filling a particular opening, but rather someone lower down on the eligible list created by HRD after competitive exam scores are finalized is picked instead. Under the law, the local hiring official or appointing authority in civil service lingo must justify in writing this bypass. Most of the relevant statutes in Chapter 31 are now more than 40 years old. 2 generations ago, the state personnel administrator would finalize the bypass and an aggrieved individual would appeal from that HRD decision to the Civil Service Commission, of which I serve as general counsel. That's no longer the case. So first of all, with the routine delegation by HRD to local appointing authorities in recent decades of the process for most hiring and promotional appointments, we need to clarify in statute that most bypass cases are now, in fact, direct appeals from a delegated appointing authority's action, not HRD's. And we should eliminate the outdated technical requirement that a copy of the appeal must be filed with HRD before the commission can process any bypass appeal. Second, I recommend that we eliminate the automatic statutory availability of a bypass letter for public inspection because many such bypass letters contain disputed and highly sensitive personal information. Instead, a public records law exemptions analysis should govern access, which could lead to redactions that blunt unwarranted invasions of personal privacy. Third, because union attorneys are generally not available to assist entry-level candidates who are bypassed for illegitimate reasons, we should consider amending the existing statutory provision that allows for a modest award of attorney's fees solely in disciplinary appeal cases to cover bypass appeal cases as well. The Civil Service Commission has adjudicated many cases over the years in which minority candidates have been bypassed for unsound reasons, and often, unless they secure pro bono legal representation, which can be hard to come by, these individuals who are trying to get a foot in the door are left to navigate unfamiliar appellate legal proceedings all on their own. The statute that allows the commission to award legal fees to a successful appellant in a disciplinary case was written many years ago, and its provisions are greatly outdated. Only a maximum of $200 can be awarded to cover attorney's fees for work performed before the commission. A like sum can be awarded if the lawyer represented the tenured civil service employee facing discipline at a municipal level hearing, and ditto if the case goes to Superior Court. And up to $100 can be allotted for transcripts, the subpoenaing of witnesses, and other litigation expenses. But that adds up to a maximum of $700. And usually a whole lot more costs and attorney hours are incurred in any civil service appeal. I propose something still very modest as a baseline. If an individual is successful in a commission case or upon appeal to court, she should be granted reimbursement of up to $1,500 for attorney's fees in each forum and up to $500 in litigation expenses. That would mean that the employer that made an unlawful or unjustified personnel decision would be on the hook for a maximum of $5,000 in all but extraordinary cases. Once in a great while, the commission will see a wholly egregious, willful violation of Chapter 31. And sadly, those cases often involve minority or female employees or candidates or deliberate nepotism. I also propose that there be no statutory cap on reasonable attorney's fees and costs if the commission makes an express written finding of either bad faith on the part of the appointing authority or an egregious or willfully repeated violation of Chapter 31 provisions, unless special circumstances would render such an award in full unjust. My proposal is in line with the authority of the MCAD to award attorney's fees and costs upon a finding of unlawful discrimination. And I understand that tenured civil service employees in the federal system who prevail in a civil service appeal also can obtain an award of attorney's fees and costs under federal law. Fourth, I recommend a couple of pragmatic, essentially technical amendments to Chapter 31 to clarify and align the powers and duties of the Civil Service Commission as the guardian and enforcer of basic merit principles under civil service law, with the decades of adjudicatory experience and judicial interpretation since the last legislative overhaul of Chapter 31 over 40 years ago. For example, the Commission serves in practice as the primary engine to investigate all systemic violations of civil service law, and yet its statutory authority to take appropriate remedial action appears limited and murky. Likewise, in response to any determination that an appointing authority lacked just cause to take adverse disciplinary or personnel action against a tenured civil service employee, the principal relief the Commission can order is reinstatement with back pay. But this hammer is not the most appropriate tool in certain cases. Sometimes the taxpayers are saddled with a huge bill that may not be warranted in a given case, and yet the Commission is mandated by current law, as interpreted by the Supreme Judicial Court, to order this relief. Chapter 31 should afford the Commission discretion to tailor remedial orders in both investigations and appeals, with an opportunity for input from stakeholders to meet the particular circumstances of each case, rather than be bound by the current one-size-fits-all form of relief that the statute imposes on the parties and often unduly constrains the Commission. The Commission should have the same remedial flexibility afforded the Commonwealth Employment Relations Board, the Mass Commission Against Discrimination, the Board of Registration in Medicine, the Department of Labor, and the Commission's federal civil service counterpart. Fifth, I propose an alignment of the anti-discrimination elements of the basic merit principles that undergird all of Chapter 31 with the cognate provisions of Chapter 151B. For example, the definition of protected characteristics under Section 1 of Chapter 31 should be updated to include sexual orientation and gender identity. And as with our state's principal anti-discrimination law, Chapter 151B, status as a military veteran should be an explicitly protected characteristic in the application of civil service merit principles. Let's also update the statute so the head of the Civil Service Commission is not repeatedly referred to in Chapter 31 as the chairman. Finally, I think we are all increasingly concerned about the potential introduced by modern technologies for not just the unwarranted invasion of personal privacy, but the recording in perpetuity via the internet of blemishes on our personal reputations. Chapter 31 makes certain commission disciplinary hearings public hearings, and another state law mandates the publication of commission decisions on a searchable website. Commissioners should have the statutory authority to take actions deemed necessary to protect the privacy of a person's health or other acutely sensitive information. Thank you, and I'll move on next to the next slide, please. And here, I need to, well, I was going to do a screen share, but I see that's not possible if another screen is up. Let's see if it's now possible, if Jesse can give me co-host privilege.
You should be able to share.
Okay, great, thank you.
Jesse, could I just ask you quickly, if we're switching co-hosts, can you take, for your presentation, if Mark doesn't need it anymore? Because it doesn't, the view changes at that point for me. Mark,
Yeah,
is that okay? We'll just switch it over to Rob.
That's
Okay.
great. Thank you.
Just switch it to Rob.
Okay. So at this point, let me just ask again if people are seeing what I'm trying to show here. Okay, here we go. Here we're talking about the process by which entry-level candidates are hired by civil service communities. First of all, a local appointing authority, could be the police chief, could be fire chief or town administrator, notifies HRD that they have some vacancies and would like to fill them from candidates who have successfully passed the civil service competitive examination. HRD has created a list of all the candidates who both passed the civil service exam and have expressed an interest in that particular community. Once HRD is apprised of the number of vacancies that are sought to be filled, they create what's called a certification that these are the individuals with the highest preference for hiring, either because they achieved the highest score on the competitive civil service exam or because one of the statutory preferences puts them at or near the top of a list. So if there are, say, 5 vacancies to be filled in a municipality's police department, what HRD will present the community with is a certification list that employs a regulatory formula we refer to as the 2n+1, meaning that if n is the number of vacancies, so in my hypothetical 5 vacancies to be filled, 2n+1 means that HRD is going to send that local hiring authority a certification with 11 names on it. And by statute, the local hiring authority under the civil service under Chapter 31 is mandated to make a selection from that pool of 11 candidates. So with a hypothetical, I would like to share with you now what could happen if the recommendation of Senator Moore's subcommittee is adopted, both by the full commission and subsequently by the legislature. The formula would be increased from 2n+1 to 3n+1, and there's a plus as well, because under current law, if someone is bypassed or falls out of the certification list, another name does not supplant that individual's name on the certification list. So the certification list under current law actually shrinks. So as I mentioned, and you can see in this chart, you begin with 11 names. But if 2 candidates are bypassed for legitimate reasons, perhaps criminal history or just a horrible driving history or whatever the issue may be, their names are just stricken from the list and no other names are supplant them. So it leaves really only 9 viable candidates. And I should also mention that historically, certifications have lasted for 2 years, at least, because exams typically have only been given on a biennial schedule. So oftentimes there are more than one hiring cycle in the life of a certification list. And right now I'm talking about hiring cycle number 1. Police chief under current law has 9 viable candidates to consider. 5 of them are ultimately hired and appointed. Under the alternative, there would be 16 in the initial pool of candidates. And if there is a bypass, additional names will be pulled up from the broader eligible list so that the number does not diminish. So 16 viable candidates remain no matter how many bypasses there might be. And so then 5 candidates are hired under the alternatives scenario as well. Now, let's imagine we're in year 2, or it could be the second 6-month hiring cycle. Suddenly the community needs to hire 5 more police officers, maybe 9 months after the first 5 were hired, or a year later. Once again, HRD under current law is going to give that community a fresh certification list of 11 names, some of which were the ones that were not selected the first time around. Under the 3n+1 formula, by contrast, there'll be a greater number of people in the hiring eligible pool, the finalist pool. Back to current law, assume 2 candidates also have to be bypassed. 2 of the newer names on the list have to be bypassed for legitimate reasons. So now there are only 4. That there are a total of 4 of the original names having been given by HRD, and the number of viable candidates is only 7. So at the end of the day, you're still trying to fill 5 positions, and you're down to only 7 candidates as finalists. But under our proposal, Senator Moore's subcommittee's proposal, additional names would continue to be added to the 3N+1 pool, and the appointing authority can skip over the 2 prior bypass candidates. So in effect, at the end of the day, the hiring authority has 20 names in the finalist pool to consider instead of just 7. And this was a proposal that was unanimously adopted by actually a majority of all commissioners on the full commission, because there were 15 members who unanimously voted to support this. The next and final topic that I have been asked to address as a recommendation from Senator Moore's subcommittee is to create a diversity pipeline from Massachusetts community colleges to municipal fire departments. And here I just briefly want to give great thanks to 2 Brandeis University interns who have been working with me last semester and this semester. Currently, Jason Nunez, he is originally from Worcester and happens to have 2 siblings who are civil service, public safety employees of the city of Worcester. So not just for that reason, but we are focusing on a potential pilot program in the Worcester area. So the background problem is that there is significant underrepresentation of women and minorities in the fire service. As the screen tells you, nationally, women constitute about only 4% of all active firefighters, despite the evolution of the fire service away from traditional fire suppression activities and towards first responder model of service. Many Massachusetts fire departments employ even a smaller percentage of females. About 3 years ago, a detailed report on the status of female firefighters in the Boston Fire Department revealed that barely 1% of the roughly 1,500 firefighters employed by the Boston Fire Department are women. Minorities are also vastly underrepresented in most fire departments statewide. Among the 10 most racially diverse cities in Massachusetts, those being majority minority communities, only Springfield comes even close to rough parity between the non-Caucasian complement of firefighters and the diversity of the citizenry they serve. Boston is only about half the way toward perfect parity within that fire department, as they employ almost 28% minority core of firefighters in a city that is about 50% minority. The other top 8 diverse cities employ less than half the expected number of minority firefighters if all hires had been drawn randomly from a perfectly representative pool of candidates. And some examples I want to give you, the Everett Fire Department has fewer than 5% minority fire employees in a city that's over 50% Black, Latinx, or Asian American. Randolph has fewer than 9% minority firefighters in a city that is 2/3 minority. City of Lynn employs fewer than 13% minority firefighters in a city that's 61% minority. And in Brockton, according to data that all of these cities supply to HRD under Section 67 of Chapter 31, there are fewer than 12% minority firefighters in this majority minority city. So there are any number of theories as to why minorities and women do not go into the fire service in larger numbers. For female firefighters, it can range from childcare can be particularly difficult to arrange given the unusual working hours and shifts of firefighters. They can be on 24-hour shifts, sometimes 2 of them in a row, and then multiple days off. The evaluation of candidates in the hiring process may be skewed against female candidates. It is true that physical strength is important in hiring for firefighters, but communication skills are also crucial. And many female candidates and firefighters, once they get hired, report a lot of unfair scrutiny within their departments, and unfortunately, a lot of sexual harassment on the job in many instances. Some of the possible reasons for underrepresentation of minorities also have to do with excessive scrutiny from superiors, isolation because they may not have a network, including family connections, and there may be few other minorities in their communities. There is a very well-known case of a particularly difficult situation in town of Brookline that resulted in a Supreme Judicial Court decision in May of last year, and a settlement that cost the taxpayers of Brookline $11 million because this African-American firefighter had been harassed and ostracized and treated very poorly on the job. So we think it's time to take a fresh look at recruitment efforts. We know that our cities are becoming more diverse. We know that the role of a firefighter is changing significantly. We know that firefighting careers are attractive. There are solidly middle-class positions in terms of salary. It is a growing field. There will be job vacancies in the future. And many of our community colleges already offer fire science degrees or other certificates that are useful to municipal fire departments. There are 15 community colleges throughout the state, well over 100,000 students enrolled. And however, there has been decreasing enrollment across the board. But nevertheless, many of these community colleges do have fire science degree programs. The question is whether the pipeline is solid, robust, and direct. So focusing on Worcester for a moment, here are the legal requirements to become a firefighter in Worcester. They have to be a resident for at least a year. They have to have at least a high school diploma or a GED, a driver's license. They have to pass the civil service exam. They have to pass a pretty rigorous physical exam. And then, of course, there's some background check and job interviews before someone is finally hired. But other than the civil service requirements, the barriers to entry are reasonably low compared to some other careers. Let's look at the demographics of Worcester. It's a city that is, according to the 2020 census data, over 35% minority. And I think that's continuing to change with the minority population growing in that city. But the Worcester Fire Department demographics are not keeping up. We may be at 11% minority today. And only 2% females. Now, Worcester is doing a lot of hiring in coming months. There is already a connection with Quinsigamond Community College, but we think it really can be significantly strengthened. And Quinsigamond is a college that is almost 50% minority, and it's over 50% female. It's right in the heart of Worcester County. It potentially could serve up to 35 different fire districts in central Massachusetts. So our proposal is to create diversity scholarships tied to students with a demonstrated interest in a fire service career. We would like to create a pilot program in the Worcester area that would create a sort of hybrid fire science, fire cadet program. In other words, students who would be part-time community college working toward their associate's degree in fire science, but also serving part-time as a cadet. And having really gaining real world experience of what it's like to be a firefighter. I talk about, a sort of wraparound ROTC type community program that would support these students all the way through from high school until hopefully some of them land a job with a municipal fire department. But that, of course, will cost some money. The Massachusetts legislature wisely saw fit at the end of last year to create a $500,000 diversity scholarship program for police recruits. I personally believe that the need for such a program is equally as great, if not more so, on the fire side, given the otherwise, relatively less supportive state programs. No, I'm not putting that well, but I think as a Commonwealth, we have put less into the recruitment of firefighter candidates than we have on the police side. So I think there is ample justification for a similar, $500,000 program that would probably not only just offer the scholarships, but would support the creation of these sort of wraparound services, the ROTC type program at community colleges, starting with Quinsigamond. It would allow candidates to undergo a rigorous physical fitness regimen, to have access to practice examinations for the real physical aptitude tests that all firefighter candidates have to pass. And it is a rigorous one. Perhaps some funding to waive the fees for these physical aptitude tests and the civil service test. Perhaps discounts at least for repeat test takers. And perhaps support for individuals within the recruit pool who speak a second language that would be of benefit to one of the municipal fire departments that we would look to serve.
Commissioner Quinnen?
Sure.
I know I'm interrupting, and I guess I do mean to, but I'm sorry to. I just, with time in mind, I
Sure.
want to leave some time for questions, and we also have another subcommittee to report.
Yep.
So I want you to report on the recommendations.
Yep.
But if you have more recommendations, please just stick to those. And if there are questions,
Sure.
we can take those, because I assume that all these recommendations have received a vote of the subcommittee.
Right. So last slide. I'll let people digest this themselves. I think there are good reasons why such a pathway program that we've discussed in Senator Moore's subcommittee would be successful. And that actually does wrap up my presentation. So
Okay.
thank you.
Thank you. And I apologize for interrupting. I just did want to take time for questions. And I'll go first and then turn it over to.
Sorry, I'm sorry.
Senator
Well,
Fraser.
actually-
We have one more, sorry. Chief Del Monte is our last recommendation.
Okay, it's one recommendation.
Yeah, just one.
I'm just going to ask you if you could stick to the recommendation, only because we're not giving our last report enough for the same opportunity. So for time. So please explain it, but you don't have to go into as much, a tremendous level of detail.
I'll be brief. Thank you, Chairman. So myself, fellow commissioners Jen Breaker and Larry Calderon were tasked with taking a look at police cadet programs. And I would just simply refer the commission to chapter 14721A, which very briefly is the police cadet statute. We had two recommendations that we would make to the full commission. One is that we modify the universal age of eligibility for cadets from 18 to 28 years old, with a maximum age to serve as a police cadet at 30 years old. And that the second part of that is that we include a minimum years of service from 1 year to a maximum of 3 years of service to be considered for appointment under Mass General Laws, Chapter 31. The basic justification for looking to modify this statute for communities under 14721A is to increase the eligibility for our veterans who are still on active duty. The current age in the statute as it reads for municipalities, with the exception of Boston, is 18 to 23. And in Boston, it is 18 to 25. The second reason is this would be a benefit to communities looking to diversify or improve gender inequities. And lastly, would be benefit to students currently in college by expanding the age of eligibility. That is my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief. I appreciate that. We're ready for questions, right, Senator Moore?
Yes, yes, we are.
Okay, so I just have a couple. Senator, when you presented, I mean, very interesting ideas, and it included putting a cap on fees, looking at fee waivers, and you point out correctly that we're one of the few, if not maybe the only state that relies on the fees to fund the civil service office, so that it would require an investment from the general fund. Has anyone looked into what that investment might be?
No, we haven't. We did not look into that.
Okay. The only other thing is a comment. Your comment about chapter 31A being dormant or essentially dead. I looked at that too during the course of the hearings, and it's a fascinating suggestion that we look into using and amending a statute that exists, because it does address some of the issues that we've seen. And I'm really excited to look into what we can do to amend that to make it useful to the civil service communities and to the Commonwealth with respect to non-civil service communities to level the playing field. So thank you for bringing that up, really.
Oh, thank you. And actually, the Commissioner Quinlan actually made us aware of that. Now, I think this is an example of how there's a lot of laws dealing with civil service that I think a lot of us don't know that are out there, that if we actually started to apply them, might address some of the issues that we're actually looking into.
That's right. That is what, and this is an example of that. So thank you for pointing that out. It's just a very good point. Chair Brady, do you have a comment?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I appreciate the recommendations, and I agree with a lot of them. I do have a question. So we didn't get an answer on what the cost of all this would be. I agree that, for some people, taking the exam was too costly and about waiving the fees. But did we get any rough idea what the cost would be from anybody?
No, we haven't.
And then, and I don't know, we can all come up with a plan to figure that out. The other thing was, as far as communities that are majority minority populations, is there a percentage recommendation based on the population? And if I miss something, please reiterate. Because like for instance, Brockton, even though on the prior to the census, it may have been a majority minority city, but until this past year, with the recent census, it's the first time it was designated a majority minority city as a whole. All the years past, it was never, even though the perception might have been that it was a majority minority city. And I know Brockton more than the other communities, but I know you mentioned Randolph. And what was Springfield? Are they meeting the quotas on hiring minorities and women?
They are, and Springfield and Brockton are both two of the what we call consent decree communities, where hiring is overseen by the federal court as a result of litigation that unfortunately has been going on for literally 50 years, since 1972. There is going to be a further federal court hearing at the end of April, but the court in those cities has mandated that the cities attempt to achieve parity, or rough parity is the standard set by the federal court. There is recognition, however, that there has often been dynamic demographic shifts that cities have rapidly become, with the influx of immigrants in particular from different parts of the world, frankly, or different parts of our country, and the positions that need to be filled, once they are filled, people remain in them for 25 years or longer. So there will always be a gap between the parity target and the reality on the ground in these communities. But the goal is to attempt to achieve rough parity, and that applies to Springfield has done perhaps the best job of the remaining consent decree communities. They are at, my understanding is they're close to 60% African American or Hispanic attorneys at the entry level. Now, it may well be a different story at the superior office level. Are people being promoted, on a race blind basis? Are we seeing as many minority superior officers? That's a different question.
And as far as, if I may ask, is there a recommendation on a percentage based on the population of how many minorities or how many women should be hired? And again, I know it's difficult if you don't get the applications. And I know that in my experience, since the mid-90s, Brockton has done a better job, whether they're not meeting the quota obviously is a whole different ballgame, but they didn't have any women on the police force a few years back in the 90s or women on the fire department, though they have done a better job hiring and promoting women. We're still not there. I know that. I know one of our former mayor, Harrington's daughter, was the first woman hired as an administrative position, like a sergeant, in the history of Brockton, which is crazy. This was several years ago, but they're talking about maybe putting a minority. Again, they're going through the process of who they're going to put in as chief. We have an interim chief right now, but getting back to the question about, is there a percentage that they should have, and is it written in the laws, or are you making a recommendation in the report?
Senator, my understanding is that Representative China Tyler's committee has discussed this issue. It was not a subject of significant discussion in Senator Moore's subcommittee. Again, with respect to the consent decree communities, the federal court has set rough parity, and the targets for percentage of minority firefighters or police are set pursuant to a qualified labor pool analysis. So an expert demographer worked with the State Human Resources Division, worked with the Mass Association of Minority Law Enforcement Officers and other parties to the federal court litigation a couple of years ago, not based on the 2020 census data, but based on data from a few years earlier to set benchmarks for each of the consent decree communities. But consent decree communities are really just a fraction of even the civil service world, never mind the 351 cities and towns of Massachusetts. So one thing that I think has been mentioned in subcommittee is that we should reach out to the University of Massachusetts system to support greater demographic analysis capabilities, so that we have within our own state system experts who can perform these qualified job analyses and tell communities, within your community, this is the percentage of individuals who would be qualified to be hired as a police officer. And that is different than the census data because of the legal preconditions to be hired as a police officer. In other words, you do have to have a high school degree, and it may be within a certain community that the rate of high school graduation is higher among some groups than others, and therefore the qualified labor pool, the figure may not be quite as high as the overall population. Because the other thing too is that in many of these gateway cities, yes, they may have a majority of minority residents, but many of those residents are, they're still 5 years old, they're 10 years old. It's a young population. And when you get down to the demographic of, say ages 21 to 32, prime age group for hiring firefighters or police officers, what might be a 54% in the overall population of minorities might drip, that might drop to only 45% within that particular age group. And when you factor in other legal requirements, such as you have to be a US citizen, you have to have a driver's license, there are other legal factors that actually do tend to depress the overall minority benchmark for hire in those jobs.
Okay, thank you.
Hey,
Senator Brady.
Mr. Chairman, can I just bring up one thing?
Okay, could I ask you, as you're jumping in, and you will do this, I know, but can we keep the discussion to the charge of the subcommittee? And the answers too, only because I'm concerned that we're not leaving enough time for Representative Tyler's presentation. So,
Okay.
so go ahead.
Yep, thank you. I just wanted to quickly say, part of the goal is we were looking at the municipalities with civil service currently. So when we were looking at this, we wanted to find ways to not penalize them, but to look at the current civil service status, but also add them flexibility so that we can try to increase diversity and make it advantageous for them to stay within the civil service. So we didn't get and we need from gateway cities to small towns, we want to make sure that based on the community and their needs, that the law will be able to facilitate the flexibility for them to stay within civil service and increase diversity.
Right.
And that's what I was going to add, if I may, Mr. Chairman. A big thing is about how we recruit these candidates, because as Rob Quinlan mentioned, the new age group coming in, that's a younger population. There's a lot of transiency in some of these gateway communities. People move in and out constantly. Some may not graduate because they're going to a different education facility. They're not staying in the community. So it goes back to, we got to do a better job with recruitment and getting the word out about how we recruit to make it more accessible to individuals out there. But thank you.
I agree with you, and we did handle that in Senator Moore's part of the presentation. So yes,
Right.
You're right
Thank you.
about that. We've got Ron Renault and then Kimberly Parr on the phone.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just going to volunteer to get you some financials on civil service, what the fees are, and sort of a budget breakdown of that entire group for your
That would be
edification.
wonderful. That's wonderful. Thank you very much.
And the last thing was just to let everyone know that there is a waiver process in place now. And if you're looking to modify that, it may be easier. Let me go back. It may be easier to modify what's existing for fee waiver versus creating something entirely new. Thank you.
Thank you. We are looking at that. Thank you. We will be looking at that. Thank you. Kimberly Parr on the phone. Kim? Can you come off? Kim, you may be more difficult on the phone. Tell you what we'll do. If you can't get in, you can text me or well, I can't tell you what, staff I think has been in touch with you, so you can send your question in that way if you're not on here on the Zoom, and then it'll be repeated. I'm going to move on to the next presentation though, and so your question will come in during the question in that period. We're also going to be here, but again, I just don't want to hold up the next presentation. So is Commissioner Tyler here? Subcommittee Chair Tyler?
I'm here. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. All right. Do you have an opportunity to get started?
Yes. Thank you so much, and good morning again, and thank you for recognizing me. I just need permission to be able to share my screen.
Okay, Jesse, you got that?
Yep. Are you able to now?
Yep. Okay. Can everyone see my screen? Good. Okay. All right. Okay. So good morning, everyone. This is the Diversity Subcommittee. Everyone, we have a lot of members here, and I just want to say on behalf of the commission, we appreciate you taking time to listen to some of the things that we discussed and look forward to continued discussion. I wanted to start off by just noting what our charge was, just for a refresher for if folks, haven't checked over this committee in a while. It's all one charge, but it reads to evaluate the feasibility of creating a statewide diversity office within the Executive Office of Administration and Finance, to establish the affirmative action plans and guidelines for municipalities to oversee the implementation of these plans and guidelines and monitor non-compliance. And also the commission shall monitor the feasibility and cost of hiring or appointing this diversity officer for every city and town with a municipal office or fire department. So I want to first start off by jumping into the discussion. We had a pretty engaging discussion. And just I'll start by just saying that folks agree that yes, given the climate and given what's going on in the world and given what we fight for every day, there was no discussion and no pushback on as to if we agree this role needs to be established or not. So we're gonna go and support this initiative to go forward to establish this actual role. One of the points of discussion that we had was the purpose of this role. And folks were in support of the purpose of this role to be more for support for municipalities to comply with the diversity mandates that we will set in place. There was a lot of discussion and a little bit of disagreeing around the mandates, where some folks thought that, we didn't want to put any hard marks in place for the municipalities to be able to reach. But if I could just give my personal thoughts on this and just everything that we've been working on as far as equity is concerned, there definitely needs to be some type of mandate in place. And I use that word very strong. And notice I'm not using the word benchmark, because those are two totally different things when it comes to diversity in general. Another part of our discussion also too focused around expanding more opportunities for civil service candidates to have a more clear pathway into actually being a successful civil service candidate, meaning a firefighter and or police officer, what have you. And so we spoke a lot about just supporting how we can actually use this role or be supportive of this new diversity director to have more opportunities to do that. And you'll see in the recommendations that we equip this diversity officer or this role with more tools to be able to be flexible in that space. And last and certainly not least, accountability measures. The same conversation we had around mandates. And there were some members of the committee that were very strong, including myself, on ensuring that these cities and towns have accountability measures. A big part of it is actually reporting. Right now, there is a mandate in place that cities and towns are supposed to report back numbers and just information on their civil service numbers and their recruitment. However, I can tell you that not every single one of our cities and towns is in compliance with that. And so we would like to have some accountability measures around that. If we don't know what's going on and folks aren't being pushed to or encouraged to report, then we're not getting the full picture as to actually what's happened in our Commonwealth. And so with that, I'd like to move to the last piece of this presentation, the most important piece, which is recommendations. And again, I do know that the full committee will pick up these recommendations. And so I do want to say that these are some pretty solid recommendations, and I will point out areas where there probably needs to be more discussion. However, I'll start with the first recommendation, and that is that, again, we support a statewide diversity director role, and that's very necessary. And I highlighted, I put a little asterisk next to director because it doesn't necessarily have to be a director. After working with A&F and learning from Ron about like the different types of roles that are in that space, it could be a director, but it's kind of more of a managerial role. So a little bit more discussion needs to be pushed behind that and figuring out what the role actually is. But I'm sure A&F is definitely equipped to figure that out. This role will be responsible for a few things. One, obviously working with municipalities to create mandates. And there was some discussion around in the future having every single municipality have their own diversity director, but I just felt like that conversation was a little bit down the line. But I did want to just note that because accountability is very important and reporting is very important. So we want to make sure that this director role has a great relationship with the municipality so that they have endless access to the information that we're looking for. Next, this role will be responsible for sharing best practices and just supporting municipalities and reaching these goals that we're going to set out. Marketing and outreach, as we noted a little bit earlier, outreach more in a sense that we want to support people actually coming and applying to civil service. So there's that. And of course, annual reporting. We did note that the test isn't not always, or the civil service tests vary sometimes. So there's going to be need to be a little bit of flexibility around reporting and when, but definitely making sure that we report on an annual basis of some sort is very important. Recommendation number 2 is that we want to equip this director with a budget for pilot programming. The last presentation actually brought this up earlier around fee waivers as being one of the very many barriers in place for folks to actually not be a successful candidate. even though they may be in shape and actually and do very well on a test, there are some other things in place that may prevent them from actually getting onto the different forces. And so fee waivers is one of the many pilot programs we will hope to be able to support, but definitely a budget for pilot programming. And we say pilot because, again, we're going to make sure that this new director collects the data. And in the future, if we want to continue to fund that, we'll have the flexibility to be able to do that. And last, again, accountability. I know this in the discussion piece, and I just wanted to note that, again, as we discussed very many times on this, the full commission, is that not every city in town actually gives information when it comes to, what's going on with the recruiting and practices and what they're doing. And so we wanted to make sure that we deter them from not reporting and ensure that within this director's role that they are required to receive information, or that the cities and towns are required to report to this director what's happening in that area. And so those are our recommendations. And I know that we have some members on the call, so I will like to now stop sharing my screen and open the floor for any discussion and or questions that folks may have. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you very much for your presentation. One question I have, you mentioned when you mentioned mandates, and I'm a little confused because you said that there was a difference of opinion. So was there a vote taken, or does the majority of the subcommittee have a recommendation as to mandating levels, or using mandates in the way that you've described?
Yeah, so I know that other members are on, and I want to leave room for them to speak as well. But so we had this discussion around the diversity, and diversity, equity, and inclusion is nothing without actually accountability. You can try your best to be diverse as all you'd like, but if there's no accountability behind that, then folks fall short. And that's kind of what that discussion was around. And so there was not a vote taken yesterday, and we will do that by email. Actually, we just didn't take a vote yesterday, but that's kind of what the discussion was around, making sure that municipalities are being good partners with the new director.
So yeah, and I would request that, because what we're looking for as a commission would be the recommendation of the subcommittee, as opposed to any opinion of a particular commissioner, which is helpful in forming the recommendations of the subcommittee. But what would be most helpful to us would be to know whether a majority of the subcommittee had a particular position on an issue, right? So if you could get back to us kind of quickly on that, because as I mentioned early in this commission hearing, we're going to start drafting our report right away.
Sure,
with
no problem.
less than 4 weeks to go.
No problem.
Okay,
we can do that.
I appreciate that. Senator Chair Brady, did you have any questions?
Sorry, it took me a couple seconds to release the mute. No, I think the representative covered most of the things on the committee, so I'm fine for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Before I open up to more questions, I just want to point out that the charge that we have to address asks this commission to evaluate the feasibility of creating a statewide diversity office within ANF. And so I think you've addressed that, because I think your answer with an asterisk on it in your report was that, yes, we should create such an office. And then the charge says that that ANF would establish the office, would establish affirmative action plans and guidelines for municipalities, oversee the implementation of these plans. That would be the new office, would oversee the implementation and guidelines and monitor non-compliance. So it seems to me, and I just ask you, that monitor non-compliance would be the sort of enforcement mechanism for this new office. Is that right? Is that how the subcommittee sees it?
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I just want to make sure this is how the subcommittee sees it. Earlier in the hearing, I thought there would be a value in continuing our commission work, because it seems to me that if this commission were to continue on, we then would be able to oversee whether or not this new office was in fact monitoring non-compliance, whether it was in fact overseeing the implementation of these new plans, et cetera. Do you think there's a value in continuing on as a commission?
Yeah, I mean, if we're able to, this is a partnership, so if we're able to support and properly implement this role, I mean, I don't see what the harm in that would be. So absolutely, I'd support that.
Okay, and then the charges to evaluate in this statewide office, and I think I agree with you that it says that and within this office is an officer. It says for every city or town with a municipal police or fire department. I think that would mean that someone has authority to oversee. It's a statewide office looking into every city or town with a municipal office, as opposed to any individual, as opposed to something that the municipality would use individually. This is an overseeing position, and I think that's what you've looked into. Do you know, or do you have an opinion, or does the subcommittee really have the opinion as to how large that office should be? In other words, does it go beyond one person to be the officer, or is there staff involved?
Yeah, so I'll let other members of the committee speak up and feel free to jump in. But we did obviously recognize that there are 360 plus cities and towns in a Commonwealth. So having one person be able to do that role was a little bit unrealistic. So we're definitely going to have to equip this this director role with it's gonna be now an office now, and that's what I was saying. We needed to probably have a couple of staffers to be support staff as well, because it's just the volume, it would be way too high.
Right. Okay. All right. Any questions or comments from the commission?
Mr. Chair.
Ron Renaud, I see your hand.
Thank you, sir. So in addition to me providing this committee with a budget analysis, I'd also like, as you and I had spoken, Mr. Chair, and Rep. Tyler, about an org chart on where this position and maybe other supporting positions may fit into the overall organization. Right. So I will get that to you early this week. And this way the committee will have full details on how this can be implemented and managed.
Thank you. Thank you for that. My screen is on the speaker screen because for the benefit of the public watching, it's easier for the public to watch. So I'm saying that because I can't see people physically raising their hand. If you use the raise hand function, then you'll be on my screen. There we go. Rob Quinnen, you've got your raise hand function. And you're on mute.
Thank you. One important concept that I heard in discussion in Representative Tyler's subcommittee was to consider creating incentives and some carrots, frankly, for cities and towns to cooperate in both the gathering of information and whatever other initiatives might be implemented by this new unit within HRD. And I think that the carrots, of course, they always come with a price tag. So it's really important that that this new unit does have a budget to entice communities to supply the information that's required to have an accurate picture of how we're doing and what the target should be for the path forward, but also for the pilot programs that we spoke of, which again could include something like the diversity pipeline from community colleges to municipal fire departments as a pilot program in different parts of the state.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, a budget and money is a recurring theme, and so we also need to consider what we're recommending to the legislature as far as if asked how much will it cost, what are we looking at? So I appreciate that, and we'll be considering that in drafting the report. Anyone else? Just use the raise hand function. Or if you're on the phone and have trouble doing that, just say something, because then you'll still pop up in the screen. Okay. Oh, Senator Brady, I see your hand.
Thank you, Mr. Co-Chair. I do have, we're trying to hold to accountability and all that. Is there any recommendations? I know that we want to give incentives. We want to get the word out for marketing and help out these communities. But if communities are not holding to the rules we put in place, what is the next step? Is there any recommendations? I hate to, when everybody's looking for funding, and we hate to hit towns with penalties as far as funding and so forth. But is there any recommendations on how we are going to hold these 351 cities and towns accountable?
So I just do want to point out that the charge establishes that this new office would create that that principle or mechanism. But I am interested to hear if the subcommittee has any suggestions.
And then if I may, Mr. Chair, so if the office does create that, we still have to approve that, I believe. So thank you.
Yep. Rep. Tyler, did you have an opinion on
Yeah,
that?
so we could go into discussion about what those were. Those seem very specific to the role. But we will be obviously convening again to obviously vote and push forward. So we will try to come up with some of those. But I just feel like that's something that the director should work out. But I do think that we should state that, you know, you should be in compliance with whatever the director sets forth. I just, you know, those are my just initial thoughts.
Ron Renaud? Oh, Senator, was that okay? Did you have another question? Thank you. Ron Renaud?
Yes, sir. I think the first question that you asked to start this meeting is the most relevant. Should this commission continue in its form or this format or some format? And I would just respectfully suggest that, yes, it should, because the first year of this new director, supervisor, manager position is going to need a lot of support. But then there's also going to be the delivery of the information to this committee or some group to continue their funding, to continue the municipality funding for marketing, et cetera. So I think this is an evolving process. This is not a one shot, let's create something and do it. If you really want results and you really want to make a difference, then I think it needs further examination in a year from now and ongoing. And it needs to be constantly evolving and tweaked. So my point is, you can't fit it all in day one because you're never going to get it, the reality of it. But I'll leave that up to the committee.
Thank you very much. I can't agree more. And I think we as a commission can expect to see in the report a vote before the commission to continue on. As you said, it may not be the individuals because of the representative capacity in which we're appointed, but the commission itself. I think we would recommend that it continue on, and I look forward to a vote on that. An individual vote on that, as we will the other recommendations. Ron Renaud, your hand is up. Oh, you are Ron Renaud. I'm sorry, your hand is up. Rob Quinnen, your hand is up.
Yes, I just wanted to, I believe it was Commissioner Osborne's idea that reporting compliance serve as the key to unlock access to some of the funding that might be made available to this new unit within HRD. So to the extent that there is funding for pilot programming or exam fee waivers, the community would not be eligible for exam fee waivers in the absence of compliance with the annual reporting.
Okay. Well, I don't really, we can consider any, I don't think that you're suggesting that we would, that those waivers would not be available to an applicant, right?
I suppose that does require further discussion, but I think to some extent, if it's more difficult for people from that community, then perhaps there will be pressure put on the local officials to come into compliance with state requirements.
I think the accountability question is more municipality facing and not like candidate facing. We're not here to put, barriers in place. We're also to public servants and a public, serving group. So there's that. But I think that that particular question is making sure that we encourage our municipalities to report is where that was focused on.
Okay. Anyone else? Anyone else with a comment or a question? I don't see any hands, and I'll give you a chance to either show a hand.
Mr. Chairman?
Yep. Okay, Senator Moore.
Thank you. Thank you. I just think one thing you have to remember is that up until this commission, I had always assumed that most communities were part of the civil service system. It wasn't until obviously being involved in the process that I've learned it's actually the other way around. So whatever we do, we should make sure that we provide a system or recommendations that aren't going to be punitive to communities and actually push them out of the system. So whether it's in whatever we're trying to accomplish, whether it's incentive based, I just hate to see us do all this work and try to accomplish these initiatives and then see more communities leave civil service rather than join.
I agree with you. And by that same token, I'd also like to see this commission look at some minimum guidelines for every community, because every community should be open to a more diverse workforce to the extent that the population shows that the diversity and and all of these issues that we're talking about, treating our veterans in the way that our civil service laws do and things like that. So, anyone else? Now we do have a few more minutes for discussion. So anyone who wishes to weigh in before we take a motion to adjourn. Okay. All right, hearing none, we're going to begin working on our report, drafting report to provide to the commission. As I said earlier in the meeting, we'll be getting to work on that, and you get some communication from us as to when to expect that our draft will be completed and presented to everyone. Thank you everyone for participating. It's been enlightening and interesting, and I appreciate all of your participation. Senator Brady, any final words?
No, thank you, Chair, and I thank everybody for their participation today.
Okay, thank you, everyone. Take a
Thank you.
motion to adjourn. Anyone?
So
Motion.
Second.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Anyone opposed?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? No. Okay, so motion to adjourn carries. See everyone soon.